What has happened, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm a couple days late on this review, but I just got caught up on Wormwood, the new show on Netflix from documentary filmmaker Errol Morris. Now, I know a lot of people say Errol Morris is one of the best documentary filmmakers of the last 40 years, and I 100% agree, but I would take that one step further and just say he's one of our best filmmakers of the last 40 years, and he's yet another example of a brilliant director who has been unable to resist the allure of long-form storytelling for one of these tech giants like Netflix or Amazon. I mean, in a year where you see David Lynch doing Twin Peaks: The Return for Showtime, which obviously was also on Hulu, or you see David Fincher taking a crack at something like Mindhunter, where he contributed 4 episodes, it's an interesting growing trend seeing how the best and brightest filmmakers alive are drifting over into this world. Even Martin Scorsese with his next film, The Irishman, which reunites Robert De Niro and Al Pacino and Joe Pesci and all these Scorsese legends, is probably going to come out on precisely the same day on Netflix as it is in the theater. And I feel like for some cinephile purists, they might fight this and say, no, these people belong in the movie theater. However, I go to the movie theater once or twice a week and almost always have a bad experience because of my fellow viewers. While I love a big, beautiful screen and I love big, beautiful sound, and I love also just the sense of mental calm you get by being in a theater with all your devices off, where you're totally 100% focused on what's in front of you. Maybe I just have anger management issues, but the moment somebody turns on a phone, even if they turn it off after I politely ask them to do so, I'm so incensed with rage inside that it takes me out of the movie. So when I see Errol Morris doing something like Wormwood for Netflix, that makes my heart soar because I know I'll be able to watch his entire 6-part narrative uninterrupted. But what is Wormwood, you might be asking? I have a feeling anybody who's interested in the CIA and/or conspiracy theories is going to watch this on a loop for many years to come, because it basically follows a 60-year investigation into this mysterious accident, as it is initially described, where somebody falls and/or jumps from a hotel window to their death in 1953. And this documentary follows the experiences of his son, Eric Olson, who, due to certain revelations in different decades, basically allows this mystery and this investigation to completely take over his entire life. I mean, here we are with interviews with him in his 70s, looking back, and on one hand, you can tell getting to the truth of this matter has given him a sense of purpose, but it's also fascinating a way how it's completely, utterly sucked the oxygen out of everything else that might have happened in his life in terms of love or career or whatever the case might be. As is often the case with a lot of Errol Morris movies, you have an interview subject who is highly intelligent, but also rather eccentric. I mean, at one point, Errol Morris even makes a joke about how you were crazy already, which is pretty unusual. If you're familiar with Errol Morris's movies, in the past, Errol Morris has very deliberately chosen not to be on screen and not have too much of a dialogue with this subject. And it was interesting seeing how in this, you see him on screen with this subject repeatedly. If you're familiar with Errol Morris's work, on the surface you might think, oh, this is going to be another movie like The Unknown Known or The Fog of War, where they do the deep dive into a few different chapters of U.S. history. But what's interesting about this is that only half of it is the interview format. The other half is this live action reenactment of some of the events from 1953, and they're shot in this gorgeous neo-noir fashion starring movie stars. I mean, you have actors like Peter Sarsgaard and Tim Blake Nelson and Molly Parker. I mean, these are world-class actors. And as I was watching, I was thinking, God damn, like Errol Morris, had he not made so many great documentaries over the course of his career, he might have had a really great career doing movies like Chinatown or LA Confidential. I mean, it seems like he definitely has the chops to have gone that way had he chosen to. I don't want to go too heavy into details because part of what makes this journey so fascinating is all the revelations that we encounter along the way. But speaking of revelations, the name of the show actually comes from the book of Revelation. And this is actually a first on my channel. I'm going to read a quote from the Bible, but here's the quote. "The third angel sounded his trumpet, and a great star, blazing like a torch, fell from the sky on a third of the rivers and on the springs of water, and the name of the star is Wormwood. A third of the waters turned bitter, and many people died from the waters that had become bitter." And this really is a show about bitter waters. My only knowledge of Wormwood up till now was basically as one of the ingredients in absinthe back in the early 2000s. I went through a brief phase where we were experimenting with bringing absinthe in from other countries that actually do use the wormwood in it, so that it has those slightly, mildly hallucinogenic qualities, and it was absolutely disgusting in taste, but very pleasurable in its overall effects. In any case, the wormwood in this is very much a bitter, rotten environment in which we find ourselves, because Eric Olson has to go up against decades of corruption and secrecy and conspiracies just to have some sense of closure about what happened to his father. His father, Frank Olson, who's played really well by Peter Sarsgaard, he basically is a guy who's interested in agriculture who in the late 40s, early 50s gets pulled into a program that ends up being weaponized during the Korean War. He starts getting involved against his will in biological weapons and germ warfare, experimenting on monkeys, something that makes him feel absolutely horrible, or getting involved in interrogations where the subject does not survive the interrogation process. Just to put things in context, during the Korean War, there were a lot of American soldiers who were captured who were either forced to sign confessions or did so on their own, where they felt very ambivalent about some of the germ warfare of those involved. At the time, we denied any involvement in those programs. But what becomes apparent over the course of this narrative is that due to Frank's resistance to some of these programs, eventually the CIA decided we just need to get rid of this guy. And so while in 1953 it was deemed like an accident and or a suicide, in the 70s the story was revised, and basically that he was subjected to LSD as part of a strange government experiment, and as a result of this experiment gone wrong, he kind of went off his rocker and fell out the window. But then when they dig up the body in the 90s, they realize he most likely was assassinated or executed by the CIA, because there was actually an assassination handbook from the early 50s about how you do it to make it look like a suicide. And essentially, you bop somebody in the middle of the forehead and you push them off a roof or out of a window and you make it look like they fell to their death. But what's incredible is along the way, Eric and his family, they're literally having sit-downs with the President of the United States. They're meeting with the director of the CIA. I mean, it's incredible just how seriously the CIA and the government took these revelations and all the efforts they took to try to keep the family docile and quiet and not investigating any further. And you'll find that this show just zips along. It's only 6 episodes. They're about 40 minutes in length. Taken as one long feature, that might feel a little bloated or overstuffed, but for a Netflix show, I was actually relieved at the brevity of the story. Sometimes Netflix shows can have a little bit of padding in the middle where you feel like episodes 6, 7, and 8 and that sort of thing maybe don't need to be there. But on the whole, I felt like this show was told in a very economical fashion. As is often the case with Errol Morris's movies, he brings in a wide range of different forms of media to enhance the story, including a lot of really cool parallels to classic movies. They have these great references to the Robert Mitchum movie Out of the Past, which is one of the all-time great film noirs by director Jacques Tourneur, if I'm saying his name correctly. I've heard some people call him Jacques Tourneur. I don't know the correct pronunciation. But also there are a lot of parallels to Hamlet. They use mostly clips from the Laurence Olivier Hamlet, which is a really good interpretation of the material. But Eric starts to feel a lot like the character of Hamlet in some ways, where he feels like his father was betrayed and murdered, but that everybody's going along as if that is not the case, and it basically drives him crazy in a lot of ways. But this 6-episode arc is so dense with information and material, I really feel like I need to watch it for a second time to really absorb it. I mean, his documentary, The Fog of War with Robert McNamara, I probably saw it like 10 times. I mean, I was absolutely fascinated by The Fog of War, and in a lot of ways, it gave me my education about the Cuban Missile Crisis in ways that I hadn't really been exposed to up to that point. But I feel like The Fog of War, if you want to know what Errol Morris is all about, The Fog of War is without question one of his strongest movies. But he's made so many remarkable movies over the course of his career. He hasn't been nearly as prolific as his dear friend Werner Herzog, who's made like 85 movies. But Errol Morris does have quite a body of work at this point. I mean, I'm glancing at IMDb right now, and there's still a ton of movies and shows that he's done that I have not seen. But of the ones that I have seen that I absolutely love, Gates of Heaven, required viewing. It's all about pet cemeteries, and not horror movies, but like actual pet cemeteries. Vernon, Florida, really short, but such a fascinating deep dive inside of a small town in the panhandle of Florida. You got The Thin Blue Line, which is one of the all-time great documentaries about solving a murder mystery and actually got a guy off death row. You got Brief History of Time with Stephen Hawking. And then you have one of his most interesting, for me, I think it might be his most entertaining, and that is Tabloid. That came out in 2010. I mean, it is one of the most wildly, deliriously entertaining movies of the 21st century. And every time I would tell people about the documentary, they would assume I was telling some far-fetched plot like in the spirit of The Big Lebowski, but it is in fact a documentary, and I think it's absolutely required viewing. In any case, Netflix continues to do some of the most fascinating work that's being done in film and television. We're going to have to come up with a new term apart from film and television, because I feel like Netflix is neither film nor television. It's not on television, and it's not film, so what the hell is it? Streaming doesn't seem to quite cover it, but whenever Netflix is, I approve. They're doing outstanding work, and I'm really looking forward to checking out the new feature film Bright, which comes out later this week. So I strongly recommend everybody checks out Wormwood, especially if you have an interest in history, CIA, conspiracies, etc. But I hope you've enjoyed this review and recap, and please consider giving my channel a subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter at Colbrax, and I'll be back at you in a couple days to review the new show Gunpowder on HBO. Talk to y'all soon.